Here we are. Okay, hello.
Hello.
um, my name is Susie Morice, and I'm here in St. Louis, Missouri. And I will be speaking with teacher Jennifer Sykes, Jenny Sykes, who's in Lansing, Michigan. Um, and we're going to speak today about the oral history project titled COVID-19 Teacher Poets Writing to Bridge the Distance. That's going to be archived at the Oklahoma State University Oral History Research Program. And so, good morning. Hello, Jenny.
Good
How about,
morning.
how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, as Susie mentioned, my name is Jennifer Sykes. I've been teaching in the Lansing area for 14 years. I teach at a local Catholic school. Our building is preschool through 8th grade, and we're a little bit different than the typical Catholic school that you would imagine with really small classes. We're actually the highest enrolled Catholic school in our area with close to 500 students in our building. So I have regular class sizes of 20 to 30 students, 2 classes per grade level. So I always like to share that because so many times people think, oh, Catholic school, she only has 6 students or so, but that's not the case. So, but I have been teaching, like I said, for 14 years, and I'm a graduate of Michigan State University. So that's a little bit about me.
There we go. And your students are 7th and 8th grade that you teach, right?
Oh, yes, correct. So I specifically teach 7th and 8th graders, around 100 students.
Okay. Well, Jenny, how did you come to be a teacher? How did you come to be an educator?
So when I was attending Michigan State, I was originally focusing on marketing and advertising, public relations specifically. And it was my junior year, and I was really getting serious about what was going to happen with an internship. There was discussion about possibly having to go to a big city like Atlanta or Chicago. And at the time, my husband was my boyfriend, and he was still living in our hometown, an hour away from where I was attending school. And I was going home a lot on the weekends, and we started having conversations about what the future would look like if we were in a big city, and what our family life would look like with me working in marketing in a very demanding job. And I started thinking that this might not be the right kind of job for the type of lifestyle I want to have and have the family that I want to have. So I started thinking about that a little bit more, and what profession I could do to still sell kind of something and use my creativity and my excitement for just general topics. And I thought, what about teaching? So I explored the education program at Michigan State and found out that it was really excellent. And the more I talked to some of my friends who were in the College of Education and found out some more information about what that program looked like, it seemed to call to me. So I changed my major as a junior, and I'm so happy I did. I just think that that was a moment of realization for me that marketing in the traditional sense wasn't for me, that I could do very similar things but with kids. And I've always loved working with kids and young people. So it was just the right avenue for me at that point.
You found the right spot.
Yeah.
Well, we're here today to document the impact of COVID on educators and on education in general. And thinking back to 2020, we're a year almost to the day. We're a year
Mm-hmm.
later. About how you first learned that you were going to be a teacher in the middle of all of this, how you were going to, well, with the jolt that most places were going to shut down,
Mm-hmm.
switch to remote learning, something that's a word we knew, but
Mm-hmm.
not a word we'd lived.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious how that came to you. How did you learn it? How did you react to it? Take us back to that time.
Okay, so for us, and really for many people, it was right around the second week in March. For us specifically, it was Friday the 13th, nonetheless, March 13th, that we found out. And again, I'm in Michigan, so we have a very proactive, I guess you could say, governor who was on top of this. I would say ahead of the rest of the country. And she made the announcement that afternoon that we would be shutting down for 4 weeks. All K-12 buildings, no matter if you're private, public, no matter what the setting, would be shut down for at least 4 weeks. So there was grumblings of it a few days prior. We being in the Lansing area, we have a lot of state workers, parents at our school who work in state government. So we had kind of heard some rumors that this was possibly coming. So I had that in the back of my mind, and I was starting to think, what is this going to look like for our school? And our administration, our principal, she had told us this might be happening. But once it was announced, it was just kind of, it was like, okay, how am I going to do all this? And how is this going to take place? And being, a middle grade teacher, my students are familiar with that kind of online platform. We use Google Classroom, and we had been using that type of platform with them periodically, but not exclusively. So I instantly just went into teacher mode and like, how am I going to get this information to the kids? And I am a parent of 2 young children. At the time, they were 2 and 8. So I had at the time a 2nd grader and just a toddler. And first and foremost, teacher came to mind. And then I'm like, but I also am a parent during this. So that was that. I just wrapping your head around it all was a big thing, A
real challenge, to be sure. I would think so. At the beginning, when things first started to happen, we coincided all of that with National Poetry Month, where we have a situation where we get an opportunity to, in the work that we do, to write poetry every single day for the days of April, each day of April, and to share that poetry and to have that group of teachers all together. That all coincided at the same time. It's like, oh, wow. So how did you react to the opportunity to be able to write every single day with teachers from across the country? And in some cases, a few of the folks with this project are out of the United States. And tell us a little bit about what that writing meant to you.
So I was first introduced to the daily writing in March because my teaching partner hosted in March with the blog. So I was introduced to the group then, and then I knew that it was really good for me and my students because this just getting ideas for writing prompts. So that was at the beginning of March that I was introduced to it. I almost feel like it was, a godsend. Like this had to happen for me, right? And then in April to have the opportunity to write every day, it truly transformed what I was teaching to my students during this time online. I kind of threw everything else out the window that I had planned on doing curriculum wise and shifted toward allowing my students to write in a way that they could express what they were going through just during this whole change of, because they were experiencing changes just like their teachers. So I wanted to give them an opportunity. And with these daily prompts, I was finding that it was predictable for me. It was a predictable moment for me to write every day. So why not give something predictable to my students as well? So it really was great. It was a great way for me to express what I was feeling and kind of just get it out on paper, and then have our community through the page, giving us feedback, and I felt like I was supported, and then I did something very similar with my students.
It really did coincide in a way that was helpful then. That's so
Mhm.
true.
Oh, for sure. The way that it was all at that time and it coincided, it totally transformed what I was doing in the way of educating students and how I was teaching them writing at that time. Because traditionally, we had just finished writing an argumentative essay, a very formulaic type piece of writing, and we were getting ready to move into some other topics. And of course, I always focus on Poetry Month with my students in terms of reading poetry and writing, but never to the extent that I ended up doing during these months of remote learning as I would have face to face. So it actually provided a really great opportunity um, for me to do that.
Yeah. This seems like a good time for you to share a poem that you wrote at the beginning.
Okay.
You've got one that sort of introduces us to you, for one thing, but it
Yeah.
also introduces us to um, the holy smokes of the pandemic. And
Hmm.
we call it Hello Pandemic. Could
Hmm.
you share that poem with us now? Thanks.
Sure. I would love to. All right. So, hello, pandemic. COVID-19, global pandemic, fear of the unknown haunts our minds. Yet some seem unscathed, think it's all a hoax. Is this real? Will it all go away? I will be prepared. I'll go with my gut. This just in, national state of emergency. Thank God I followed my gut. Never trust the ignorant. Everything's different, yet the mind persists, still fearing. The anxieties of February well within reach, while nightmares of March introduce themselves. To the succubus of April occupying the empty desk at the front of my virtual classroom, I snicker at the vision, but I'm not even sleeping.
How does it feel a year later to read that poem?
Well, it reminds me of just all of these breaking news things that we would see on the
Mhm.
television screen, right? This idea that every day there was new information coming out, with this disease, this pandemic, we didn't have a lot of information. We were relying on the scientists to tell us, what's happening, and we get our information from the media. So we had the news on in our house more than we've ever had on before, I feel like. So I just, it felt like there was always this new thing, right? And it never was getting better. It just kept getting worse and worse. So those lines where I talk about, the anxieties and then the nightmare and the succubus, it kept compounding upon, it didn't seem to get any better. It was just getting worse and worse and worse. And then, it just, at the end of my poem, when I say I'm not even sleeping, right?
Yeah.
It reminds me now, looking back at it, that I don't think I was getting much sleep during that time. So, but what I was living was like a dream. So it was just reading it now and looking back on it and how much we've grown, not only as teachers and how our students have grown, but just as a community and a country and what we've learned between then and now. It's just amazing to read it now and think, am I still sleeping or am I awake to it, so
Well,
so it
it brings to heart. You used the word predictability a little while ago,
mhm,
and it comes through here. The whole lack of predictability, or
mhm,
that you came to rely on the media. You had to see the news more than you ever felt you had to see the news.
mhm, yep,
The sleep the line in that poem that really hits me is the last line.
mhm.
It is the but I'm not even sleeping. Um, yeah. How is that going now?
Fortunately, I'm sleeping. um, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in terms of what the current state of things are, but I am exhausted every day. So, but I am sleeping and I am face to face. So I mean, I'm with my students right now, but it's, what it's like to be a teacher. It's exhausting. So fortunately, I am sleeping again. And I do feel like there's hope, right? And things are improving. I have received my vaccine. I'll be officially considered fully vaccinated after I've had my second shot for almost 3 weeks. So those types of things, when I look back at this poem now, it's just amazing to think how far we've come, that I'm not experiencing necessarily anxieties of February or nightmares going into March, that it seems more hopeful. So that's a really positive thing.
Yeah. Congratulations on vaccine. Yeah.
Thank you. Yay.
You mentioned also the worries you had about your students. Your poem even speaks to the fears and the discord of having so many things that are not what they expected. Can you talk a little bit, thinking back again to 2020 and this early stage, how were your students feeling? What was coming forward in the writing that they were doing? What were you learning about them that you didn't know?
So I actually learned a great deal about my students during this time. So I was teaching, at this time, I was teaching all 7th grade English, writing, grammar, and then I was teaching 8th grade literature. But I ended up incorporating the writing piece into with both my 7th graders and my 8th graders. So I have them both year, I have those 7th graders for 2 years, and I felt like I knew them really, really well as 8th graders, but I learned so much more, and it was through their writing. So several of our students have parents that would be considered essential frontline workers. Again, being connected so close to the university, we have a lot of students whose parents work for Michigan State as professors and teachers. There are several healthcare workers in our community, and governmental workers too. I would say that that's the majority of our parent population in our school community. And, like all of the other schools, we were thinking about what is necessary for our students to be learning in terms of technology and internet and all of those types of things. And fortunately, our school was able to provide technology for students who didn't have it. And even access to the internet for students who didn't have that. So those kinds of troubles that other schools were dealing with, we fortunately had a solution already for and in place. But what we didn't consider was the fact that these students are becoming caregivers to their younger siblings while their parents are working on the front lines in healthcare, that they're experiencing something that we can't even imagine, living with parents on the front line. Sorry, I'm going to get emotional. I'm sorry. I wasn't expecting this.
No, it's a piece of what we've been through. It's really jarring.
Okay, so just a second. But we were learning that our kids were becoming parents. And how can we require any kind of education of them other than learning just basic skills of living? So writing allowed them to say that, right? And it allowed us as teachers to make adjustments and really realize what our job was. And it was just to be there for them at that time. So yeah, I would say that was one of the biggest hurdles, was realizing that in this moment, it's not so much about fulfilling curriculum. It's about listening to our kids and doing whatever we need to do in order to support them. So, but yeah, I'm sorry.
There's growth in so many ways that you can't necessarily put down on a scheduled curriculum. I mean, it's not like your students weren't growing. They were growing, but they were not growing for the same reasons.
Right.
They weren't doing that nice paced, okay, 6th grade, okay, then 7th grade. They became parents. Yes.
Exactly. So we saw that among our kids, and there was this instant maturity that was automatically being shown in their expression and in their writing and in their voice. Like you could see it. You could see this transformation within the writing, and it was just amazing. And then the feedback that was given. So I used, in order for students to share their writing, I used the platform Padlet, which others will be, familiar with. And then I used feedback sentence stems that are very similar to what we use in our writing feedback from Sarah. And it was amazing to see the support that the students were giving to each other. So we were continuing to build our community even at a distance. And it was just so great to see that, to see the kids taking care of each other and taking care of their siblings and taking care of their parents and doing what was necessary. And like I said, I teach in a Catholic school, and it was just all representative of being a great Christian and being a good person. So I enjoyed being able to give them the opportunity to share that, but then also to allow them to grow in ways that they didn't even expect. So yeah.
There aren't a whole lot of upsides to an international horrible pandemic, and that
Right.
There are things that were positive. It's really very wonderful, actually.
Yes.
It's a moving experience. When we think about some of the poetry that you wrote sort of midstream during this time, there's another poem that really shows sort of a shift in your own outlook. And I wonder if you would share that poem, the one called Ending Among Comfort.
Yes. So I wrote this. It's funny because I actually wrote this before the other poem, but I think it's really, timeline wise, but it's funny as I look back at it now, and we'll talk about that. But ending among comfort. Trust in the Lord. Trust in an ending. Ending is a beginning. Beginning new ways of teaching. Teaching unfamiliar ways of learning. Learning meaningful lessons. Lessons of staying still. Still is the only way to move. Move forward during this time. Time seems to be crawling further into the unknown. Unknown to humankind. Humankind finds solitude. Solitude in the stillness. Stillness in quarantine. Quarantine allows new experiences. Experiences between parents and their children. Children and their school teachers. Teachers become students. Students overnight. Overnight, developing lessons. Lessons from a distance. Distance unsought. Unsought and unbearable. Unbearable to see your friends and teachers on a screen. Screen creates a barrier that protects yet causes grief. Grief of separation from those you love. Love transforms into enrichment in art, music, reading, and writing. Writing crayoned messages and friendly letters with paintings and stories. Stories read on front porches that clasp those deliveries of outstretched arms that carry invisible hugs that provide strength for the journey into the unknown. Unknown we must accept and seek comfort and grace that is necessary grace.
It's a beautiful poem.
Thank you.
Talk about some of the lines in that really matter more than others to you. What really was tugging at you?
So, there's a few lines that really stand out, especially as I reflect on it now, a year later. At the time that I wrote this, we found out that day that our stay-at-home order was extended, I think for another 3 weeks. And we also found out that there was a suspension of face-to-face learning for the rest of the school year. So I think it just kind of hit me that I'm not going back to school this year. And that idea, the lines toward the beginning, that when I say still is the only way to move forward during this time, because we had to stay home. We weren't going to be attending school face to face, but we had to continue moving forward, right? We had to continue with doing things like not like we normally would, but we had to move forward and continue to give our students learning opportunities and enrichment and all of these things that I later mentioned. But how can we do this during a pandemic and in a way that is enjoyable for them and helps them get through this time, right? And support them like we normally would, even, face to face. We're still teaching them and we're still their support. So we have to figure this out in a new way, but we have to stay still yet move forward. So that one stands out to me. This is kind of funny a little bit, but I think I was writing this poem when my daughters were watching Frozen 2 with the song Into the Unknown, because I said unknown a million times. And they loved watching that movie. I think that was part of my inspiration here. I just noticed the lines as I'm reading it back, further into the unknown, and I'm saying it over and over. But I think that speaks to me being a parent during this time, right? And relying on Disney Channel to help get me through those days when I'm trying to teach my class online and I need them to be quiet for a little bit. So that's part of it.
Talk about that just a little bit too. I mean, even this morning, for us to have this time on the Zoom, the whole idea that means there's shuffling going on in your family. Talk about what that's like when you're also teaching your own kids, teaching everybody else's kids,
right?
And being a happy mama, being a happy wife, and so
right.
talk about some of that.
Yeah. So like I said, in the early, last year in the early months of being, a teacher online and during the pandemic, I had a second grader. My oldest daughter was in second grade at that time. So she's fairly independent and able to, follow along with what she needed to do as an online learner, but she still needed a lot of direction. So we had a very specific schedule in place of when I was going to help her, and I just let my students' families know, that during this point in time, I'm teaching her. And then during this time, I'm able to communicate with you I had office hours available to my students and my families, but I had to stick to those hours or I would have completely lost my sanity. So I did that and I stuck to the schedule. I tried to keep it as balanced as possible. Over time, I realized that I was on the computer way too much and that I had to just draw the line. So I started setting a timer for 4:00 p.m. and that's when everything I had to put it away. But that didn't happen until May. So I went through most of March and April and I only had like 3 weeks left when I made that realization. So it was really, really difficult. I did rely a lot, like I said, on TV as my kid's babysitter for a little while. And at the time she was 2, I had an almost 3-year-old at the time also. So, and my husband was also working from home. So, it was a lot. It was a lot to try to juggle everything. And we had those moments where I'm on a live Google Meet and I've got kids screaming in the background or, I want lunch or I need this or that. And my families are hearing that on the other side, but it was reality. And my kids, my students, they thought it was hilarious, especially when my youngest said, I went pee-pee on the potty, but it's reality. And that's what happened. And I really think it strengthened our relationship, like my relationship with my students and my relationship with my family, because we were experiencing things that were new. And I learned a lot about my daughter as a student, as a learner. So if anything, I kind of feel like parents probably learned more about their students and their children during this time. And it may have been eye-opening to them too. So.
And that showed up in the students' writing.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about do you have any specific pieces or specific things that kids pointed out to you?
Yeah, so I had one student in particular whose parent is a nurse, and she was working, with patients in a COVID unit. And in our neighborhood too, we have several nurses in our neighborhood. So I was hearing stories, from people in my neighborhood, but then in writing, this student in particular was writing about her mom and how, she was quarantined from them and living in a hotel. And it was just difficult because she's the oldest child, and she had to figure out a way to manage some things at home while her parent was away. And fortunately, she didn't have to be away for so long because some things shifted at the hospital where she didn't have to be in that role. It was like a 2-week window, but I could definitely see a shift in her writing during that time. I could see sadness and loneliness. I could see, just through her expression. I wish I had actual lines in front of me, but it was a definite shift in emotion that was expressed in her voice and her writing. And we also have some students whose parents work in law enforcement, and they were dealing with just situations I didn't even think about, but then as we started to see protests, and at our Capitol, we had several people protesting our governor and her choices to shut things down. And that was coming through in the writing. Students whose parents work in law enforcement talking about protecting government or protecting government officials. And you knew what they were referring to, but they weren't saying it, they were just alluding to it, or, it was just a point of inference. And I thought, this is great. Like, they're sharing their feelings, but they're still trying to be secretive about it. You know what I mean? Like, they weren't just coming out and saying it. They were doing it like writers do it, like really good writers do. So I was, of course, sympathetic to their situations and empathetic toward them. And I think that was one of the biggest positive outcomes, was that it taught our students to be empathetic towards one another too, that they were going through similar circumstances, and they learned that through each other's writing, and they were able to connect in a different way than they would have had this never happened. So I think it made them stronger too.
That takes us sort of to looking a little bit more toward the future.
Mm-hmm.
Shift in your own teaching. You're back with students full-time, face-to-face now.
Yes.
And you're vaccinated now.
Yes.
Thank heavens. And what are some takeaways that you had from the experience that you had when things were at the peak of how scary it really was for kids and for you? What are your takeaways that could help you teaching going forward?
So like you said, and you mentioned, we've been face to face since August. We've had moments of going into, shutdown or quarantine. And I think just since we've been back to school this year, writing has taken a whole different, it's taken kind of its place in the driver's seat for everything that I do in my classes. Everything comes back to, how are my students going to have an opportunity to write about this? Every concept, every standard, I'm trying my best to figure out a way to build community through writing, because I saw it be so successful during that crazy stressful time last year at the peak of the pandemic. And it's working. And that's been a huge takeaway. I've continued using some of the platforms that we use during distance learning, because it gives them a safe space to share their writing and to give feedback without feeling the pressure of speaking face to face necessarily, because that's scary to tell somebody what a great writer they are, or to share personal connections face to face. But in an online situation where you can type it out, that's one way that was really a positive, that I learned from online learning that I would not have known that they were able to connect so well with writing. So I've continued in that regard to use that platform in order to help them build that community.
Now, when you have your kids face to face, are you seeing that translate? Does
Yes.
it translate?
Yes. So especially among my 8th graders, because obviously my 8th graders from last year are now in high school, so I don't see them. So those students that I had last year as 7th grade writers, who are now my 8th graders in face to face, they went through it with me online, and now they're online, and now they're face to face with me. So things come up all the time. Hey, remember that poem I wrote last year? It connects really well with this unit that we're learning because, and so on, right? So they do connect back to their writing pieces. Some of them brought their journals, that because I had them keep poetry journals during April, they brought them to school this year and are continuing to fill them up as they write. So their writing journals came with them. And I think that kind of shows the importance of writing to them too, that it's like something that they're holding on to as like a memento almost.
Yes.
Of that time, and they reference it and they share it, and we're social distancing obviously, and we're wearing masks at school, but as a community they're speaking out more, and it feels like they're not afraid to share in front of each other. Whenever we have discussions, everybody, for the most part, give or take a few kids, is participating. And I think it's because of that community we built in the spring last year. I really do. I feel like they feel safe with each other, and like they have a stage that they can speak on safely. And they're so great about giving each other positive feedback and even constructive criticism. And I've never seen a class so willing to do that. And I really think it's because of what they went through together last year.
Yes. Well, they've become their own archivists of history, actually.
Yeah.
You're seeing that they recognize that they hold a whole lot of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
That each one of those poems that they wrote, all the stuff that they put in that journal has become their own body of evidence.
Right.
Of what they went through. Gosh, when they're as old as we are,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to have pieces of information that are going to be pretty priceless.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because we were just talking about it the other day as their writing being a primary source, right? That
Yes.
they're going to be able to, that they should really hang on to this, or put it, some of them were saying that they're typing them, right, and saving them to their Google Drive and their personal drives, so that maybe someday someone will want to publish them. So that there's going to be a place for that writing. People are going to want to read about it and reflect on it, because we're getting into soon here discussing World War II literature and how primary sources are key to learning about the experiences people are going through. And I said, this is a moment in history too. You are all writing about a moment that will be in the history books. So think about your writing in that way. So it's, and some of them are really taking it to heart, right? They're excited to share their writing.
That's really something. That's good stuff. A lot of the documentarians have been digging into 1918 and looking for those primary documents. How did people handle the pandemic in 1918? It's
right.
Like that, and those are priceless pieces of information, what we're learning. I was surprised myself in things that I learned by digging through the 1918 newspapers. It's like,
right.
oh,
Right.
people did the same things they're doing now.
Right.
That's really something. Those are really wonderful insights. So now in your area, in Lansing and in your school community, where does COVID-19 sit? How are things now?
So things are improving greatly here. I actually looked this morning at our positivity rate, and I think it's right around 5%. So our state is still we're somewhat open, right? I mean, there's things that are slowly starting to open up. Actually, several schools who have not been face-to-face since last March are starting back face-to-face this upcoming Monday with March 1st. That was the goal of our governor. She put that out about a month ago, maybe a month and a half, saying that her goal was for all schools to be back face-to-face or at least hybrid by March 1st. So several schools are getting to that point. I know the school that services our school, the public school system that services our building, they're going back on Monday. So busing will start back up for our students who didn't have busing until now. Some of our support staff, like our speech pathologist, she will be able to be face-to-face with our students now versus through a Zoom. So those are some things that are currently happening. And like I said, we've been back to school face-to-face since Christmas without any major quarantining or shutdown. We've had a few individual students, so things are improving. And as more people are vaccinated in our area, we're noticing that the numbers continue to decline. So as I said before, things are looking more hopeful. And I feel like we're in a good place at this point, and it's just getting better. So,
am I right in that your kids have gotten just used to wearing masks? They're not complaining about it, like at the very beginning?
So yeah, you're right. I would say in saying that they are very used to it at this point. I actually had a few students asking, what's next year going to look like? Are we going to have to wear masks? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. They're like, well, it's just we're just used to it now. Or some of them hate it, and they still try to pull it down, and we have to reprimand them for that and give friendly reminders. Hey, you need to put that up there over your nose. But for the most part, they've accepted it. And even our little kids are really good about keeping them on. My daughter is in 3-year-old preschool this year, and they also wear masks, but I think they've just learned that this is how it is right now, and it's necessary to keep everyone safe.
To keep everyone safe is pretty much the mantra that makes make sense. It's like,
yep, that's what we keep saying.
Numbers are scary. We're at, I think, 505,000 lost lives.
Mm-hmm.
Stunning number. And so
it is.
It's hard to make that real for kids unless it touches them. But
yeah, we've had several students too who have lost family members to COVID. Really? So we do see, a difference between those with a closer connection to it, that they'll speak out, and they'll give other students reminders like, hey, my grandpa died, keep your mask on. I'm dealing with older students too, but they're really opening up and saying things. So I think that's good too.
Yes. They're finding their voice, like you said earlier, they're willing to speak up and say what needs to be said.
Yes, they are. Yeah, this is one of this year as a whole is probably my most outspoken class and set of my most outspoken junior high group ever. And I really do think it speaks to everything that we've gone through in the last year as a country and what they're seeing in the media, and just that there is a place for young people to have a voice, and you need to share that. So
yeah, that's a powerful thing. And the voice through writing and the voice literally. That's
yeah.
That's good stuff. Well, Jennifer, we've been talking for a while now, and I'm curious if there are some other experiences with writing and the struggle with the pandemic. Are there any other things that you'd like to talk about that we haven't touched on?
I feel like I've shared quite a few things. Just that this idea of letting students have a voice through their writing, that we need to continue doing that and really putting it at the forefront of teaching. I know for so long there's been an emphasis on formulaic writing and grading writing, and what a struggle that is for teachers to grade writing and teach writing. But I don't even think it's so much about grading it. I've learned that over the last year that you just need to give them the opportunity to write, give them that experience to grow as writers and to speak out as writers. It just to see them grow as young people and writers, and to find their own voice in their writing. And I've really taken that to heart as an educator this year, is just to give them that opportunity more often, that everything else will come, with the more writing experience they have, and just talking about writing and giving feedback on writing, then all of those other standards, those curriculum standards, they'll fall into place.
Mhm.
But let them fall into place in the writing and in the conversations you have about writing. So that's my biggest takeaway from this last year, is just the importance of allowing students to write and to speak through writing.
I think that's really very priceless. That's great. So there's one last poem that maybe you'd like to share with us before we close for today.
Sure. This poem is called World Awakens. The world awakens, buds of yellow, green, and pink start to peek out from their hiding places. Beads of rain rest on the reclining sticks, victims of the sleds that pummeled over them while resting. Daily walks to the mailbox bring recycling bin food, and the whisper of poppy hellos and lily bulb salutations bring a much needed smile to my face. A chill catches me off guard while the sun's rays stroke my spine. Warmth. Warmth finds its home and decides to stay a bit longer each night. Raindrops dot the ground, stirring up the dust. The smell of wet soil and rotting worms that couldn't find their way back escort me on my return, preparing the way for summer lust. It will be here soon. It must.
It must.
It must. Especially here in Michigan.
Yes, we're feeling it. I think the whole country got pretty much frostbitten in the last few weeks.
You're right.
That was really something. Oh, well, Jennifer, thank you so much for what you've shared with us today. I think it will go a long way for people to understand what it was like to be a teacher writer, to see what your students were doing, what your own kids were doing. You and your husband are still surviving.
We are.
It's great. So is there one last thing you want to leave us with?
Just to keep writing, right? Like, and allowing our students to write and to talk. I think one of the most important things, we can let them write and write and write, but I really think that one of the most important things is to talk about your writing, and to allow students to give feedback on writing, so that they can share with each other how they connect, and how they have similar experiences. Because one thing, we've all noticed in this last year is how divided we can be as, a country, and having different ideas about things. But I think that if we can come to an understanding and look at each other's perspectives on certain topics, and that can happen through writing and discussion, that problems can be resolved through seeing each other's perspectives and talking about it in a constructive way and in a positive way. So why not start that with them young through writing? So that's my takeaway and my last thoughts, because that's the most important thing.
That's great. Thank you, Jennifer, very, very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Stay well and stay safe.
Yes, you too.